Okay, we saw in the previous video how to construct the normal curve using the 60% 1/7, this being 60% the height of the center, this being 1/7. And I've added labeling here. Z equals 0 here, Z equals 1 here, Z equals 2, Z equals -1, Z equals -2. Now, relating that back to what we had for the histogram, it's a very similar picture. Z equals 1 stands for 1 standard deviation to the right of the mean. Z equals 2 for 2 standard deviations to the right. And Z equals -1, which I didn't label, 1 standard deviation to the left. Z equals -2, which I did label, 2 standard deviations to the left. Next question. If we have, let's say, a sheet of 1/4 inch steel, and we cut out this figure here, and we cut it out at such a size that it weighs 100 pounds, then what's the weight of each of these sections? Okay, including this section here. I assume this section goes to 0 out here pretty soon. It doesn't actually go to 0, but it gets very close to 0. Okay, so what's the weight of each section? Now, I would recommend that you just think in terms of, well, let's take this half. We've got 1, 2, 3 pieces here. That's going to total 50 pounds. Clearly, there's more weight here than there is here, and more weight here than there is here. How much weight do you think is in each of these sections? Now we want to make some estimates. We've got a value of Z, 0, 1, 2, or 3. So we're going to have Z equals 3 out here. You can extend the curve a little bit. We're asking for each value of Z, what's the percent of the curve, or the percent of the area, or percent of the weight that lies between the middle and that value of Z. I don't know what I did to obliterate my W there, but I did something. Okay, so what's the percent of the curve between the middle and Z? For example, what's the percent of the curve between the middle, which is here, and Z equals 1? What do you think? You should pause, think about that if it's not completely obvious to you. But between the middle and here, that's 34%. And I could draw a picture corresponding to that, just a little normal curve. Talking about like this part of the normal curve between the middle and Z equals 1. Now, next question. What's percent between the middle and Z equals 2? You should have an opinion, and pause until you do. Okay, hopefully you've done that. Well, between the middle and Z equals 2, we're talking about this. Okay, and that's going to include the Z equal the area between the middle and Z equals 1, as well as the area between Z equals 1 and Z equals 2. It's going to include this area, and that adds up to 34% plus 14% equals 48%. Okay? Now, how much between Z equals 0 and Z equals 3? Well, that takes us out even further. You should sketch your own picture. You should have paused and thought this through. But let's say here's Z equals 1, Z equals 2, Z equals 3 out here. Now the curve never actually reaches the horizontal axis, but it gets very, very close. So we could say here we have very close to 50% of the curve, because we have very close to everything on this half of the curve. Now, if you haven't done this, even if you have, you should have paused and actually done this, gotten your estimates. Now, we had really a pretty good estimate from one student. Said there was 2 pounds here, 15 pounds here, leaving 33 pounds here. And that's really pretty close. But the accurate numbers, if you have, and of course, when you sketch this thing by hand, it isn't going to be completely accurate. My sketch here is a little lopsided up here. I just kind of made this a little too fat up at the top. Anybody's sketch is going to be a little bit off. You're not going to estimate 60% really accurately. You're not going to estimate 1/7 all that accurately. But for a perfectly drawn bell-shaped curve, a normal curve, you'd have 34% of the curve here. And of course, if it weighs 100 pounds, that would be 34 pounds. 14% here, and about 2% in the rest of the curve. And the curve is symmetric, so it's 34% here, 14% here, 2% over here. Those aren't exact percents, those are approximations, but rounded to the nearest percent, that's what we have.